Well, with Justice Department lawyers facing the possibility for the first time in history of being found in criminal contempt of court thanks entirely to Donald Trump, the greater tragedy that will be studied for centuries to come wherever American law and American history are taught is that tonight the United States of America is enduring for the first time in its history the governance of a president who treats any law that he does not like with contempt. Every president, other than Donald Trump, has taken the oath of office seriously. They all felt the solemnity of their pledge to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. Some presidents embodied the principles of that oath more fully than others, but none of them ever came close to the constant contempt for the Constitution that Donald Trump has demonstrated. The only criminal president we had prior to Donald Trump was Republican President Richard Nixon, who, in the end, followed his oath in fully complying with the most painful order any president has ever received from the United States Supreme Court. Richard Nixon was ordered by the unanimous opinion of the United States Supreme Court to turn over secret tape recordings of his conversations in the Oval Office, which he knew contained incriminating evidence against him that would get him impeached and removed from office and then convicted of federal crimes. Richard Nixon knew better than the lawyers who were pursuing those tapes just how incriminating those tapes would be for Richard Nixon. President Nixon knew better than the members of the Supreme Court just how incriminating those tapes would be for him. Richard Nixon was a sharp enough lawyer to know that if the Supreme Court ordered him to turn over those tapes, and if he turned over those tapes, he would be forced out of the presidency and he would be criminally prosecuted. Nixon knew all of that. And Nixon turned over those tapes 12 days after the Supreme Court ordered him to turn over those tapes. And so, as bad as Richard Nixon was, as criminal as Richard Nixon was, Richard Nixon, the only president who escaped prosecution after serving his term as president by obtaining a pardon from his successor. Richard Nixon had more respect for the due process of law and more respect for the Constitution than Donald Trump, the man who apparently respects nothing, has never had anything but contempt for the Constitution, which he has solemnly sworn to protect and defend. What more evidence would anyone need that Donald Trump putting his hand on a Bible and taking an oath means absolutely nothing? All of Donald Trump's wives, including his current wife, soon learned that the words of a marital oath mean nothing to Donald Trump. Donald Trump's current wife was one of the two family members who never set foot in the courtroom in Manhattan last year when Stormy Daniels was testifying under oath about the precise nature of Donald Trump's violations of his marital oath that he is supposed to be living under right now, tonight. The other family member who did not show up in that courtroom is Donald Trump's youngest son, who was at home with his mother when he was 4 months old, and Donald Trump was in a hotel room with Stormy Daniels. You don't have to be highly educated. You don't have to follow the details of government and politics to know what an oath means to Donald Trump. Stormy Daniels could explain it all to you in very simple terms that anyone can understand. Donald Trump's contempt for the Constitution begins at the beginning of the list of amendments called the Bill of Rights. The founders wrote the Constitution and the states ratified the Constitution and created the United States of America before the Bill of Rights was written. Many of the founders and the first Congress believed that the first order of business of the new government had to be the writing into the original law of the land, the Constitution via the 10 Amendments, exactly what the government owed to every citizen. the protections the government owed to everyone in America. Donald Trump doesn't just hate the First Amendment, he has violated it. Donald Trump repeatedly says that news organizations, including this one, that he doesn't like, should be closed down. Richard Nixon, on his worst day, never thought that, never said that. Donald Trump's attempt to take over Harvard University was, from beginning to end, a violation of the First Amendment by the President of the United States of America, unlike anything we have ever seen in the history of the presidency. And now Donald Trump is violating the Constitution's Bill of Rights provisions for due process for anyone he wants to deport. And he has violated those rights to the point that the Trump Justice Department lawyers now face a possibility of being found in criminal contempt of court, which we will discuss in detail later in this program. From the start, for 10 full years now, since Donald Trump, the candidate, first began talking about tariffs, I have been reminding you of what you learned in your high school government class, if you took that course the way I did, about tariffs. The president cannot randomly decide which tariffs to increase or decrease. So says the Constitution. And I learned that from my great teacher and baseball coach in high school, Henry Lane. And then I learned a little more about it while majoring in economics in college and studying, among other things, international trade. And then I learned a lot more about it when I became the chief of staff of the Senate Finance Committee, working for Chairman Daniel Patrick Moynihan on the committee that has jurisdiction over tariffs. When the Senate Finance Committee was created in 1815, tariffs were virtually the only business of the Finance Committee, which also has jurisdiction over taxation, because in the early days of the country, tariffs were the largest source of revenue for the federal government. The income tax was a 20th century creation and instantly became the dominant revenue stream to the federal government. But Congress, the House and the Senate, have complete control of tariffs and taxes given to the Congress directly in the Constitution, the very first law of the land, the first law of the United States of America. In 1977, the Congress passed an obscure law called the International Economic Emergency Powers Act, which gave the president some tools, limited tools, to deal directly in an emergency, a temporary emergency, with some international issues specifically, but specifically did not give the president the power to touch tariffs in any way. And it is that obscure 1977 law that Donald Trump has been using to justify what I have always insisted are his illegal tariffs. How obscure is the International Economic Emergency Powers Act, created in 1977? When I was the top staff member of the Senate Finance Committee with jurisdiction over tariffs, I did not know that that law existed. There was good reason for that. No president of the United States ever used that law to touch a single tariff, not once. And so I entered the first Trump presidency with the belief that the president did not have the legal power to randomly raise tariffs. But Donald Trump did it. And Donald Trump got away with it. And Republicans in Congress who could have stopped him refused to do so. And I have been waiting and waiting and waiting since that first Trump presidency and his first illegal tariff on washing machines, claiming that imported washing machines created an international emergency. I have been waiting for what finally happened today. I have been waiting for someone with the power and legal authority to go into any federal court anywhere in the United States and put Donald Trump's name on a lawsuit suing him to stop his illegal tariffs. And that happened today in the federal court for the Northern District of California, with Donald J. Trump as the principal defendant, and the state of California and governor of California as the plaintiffs, who have finally brought the case that spells out just how illegal the Trump tariffs are. The suit was filed by California's Attorney General Rob Bonta. And right there in the lawsuit is one of the explanations for why I always believed we would never see a president, even Donald Trump, try to raise and lower tariffs without congressional approval. The lawsuit says, quote, tariffs are not among the numerous actions that the International Economic Emergency Powers Act authorizes the president to take under a declared emergency. Indeed, the word tariff does not appear in the relevant statute at all. No president has previously relied on the International Economic Emergency Powers Act to impose tariffs in the half century since the enactment of that law. Under our constitutional system, the president may not rule by fiat. The California lawsuit explains exactly what a tariff is, and none of Donald Trump's lawyers will be able to dispute one word of this in court, where they're not allowed to lie. A tariff is a tax. The lawsuit says a tariff is a tax placed on goods imported into a country. It is assessed on the good at the port of entry. So the cost is borne by the distributor who is receiving the goods in the United States, not on the country of origin. The tariff effects are thus immediate. And so there it is in writing in federal court. China does not pay Donald Trump's tariffs, never has, never will, not one penny of them. And Donald Trump's lawyers will not dare to contest that fact in any way in court. China does not pay Donald Trump's tariffs. That lawsuit says exactly what I learned in high school. Quote, the Constitution does not vest in the president any authority to impose tariffs. Rather, the Constitution expressly vests the authority to impose tariffs solely in Congress, not the president. Congress's power in this area is exhaustive because the Constitution does not vest in the president any authority to impose tariffs. Any authority for the president to do so must come, if at all, from an act of Congress. And Congress has indeed granted the president an extremely limited right to impose tariffs, for example, in anti-dumping cases in which, after a full and exhaustive study of trade practices, the federal government determines that an exporter to this country has engaged in unfair trade practices of pricing below actual cost, for example, in an attempt to specifically undermine producers of that good in the United States. In cases like that, which are rare, they have been carefully adjudged by every president who has imposed anti-dumping penalties. That is the principal tool presidents have used to combat unfair trade practices that violate some trade agreements that we already have in place with some countries around the world. And every president prior to Donald Trump has used that power rarely and very carefully. The lawsuit quotes language from the House of Representatives defining the dimensions of an emergency under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. Quote, emergencies are by their nature rare and brief and are not to be equated with normal ongoing problems. Normal ongoing problems would be smuggling drugs into this country, smuggling fentanyl into this country, kind of drugs that have been smuggled in this country for all of our lives. Through the entire history of this country, there's been smuggling into this country. And there is another piece of the law that Donald Trump is pretending to use to raise tariffs, which he is very clearly violating. The lawsuit accurately says that the law provides that the president, in every possible instance, shall consult with the Congress before exercising any of the authorities granted by this chapter, and shall consult regularly with the Congress so long as such authorities are exercised. Donald Trump violated each word of that provision. Donald Trump did not consult with Congress before trying to use that law, and has not consulted with Congress after invoking that law, so he's violated that law. How much is at stake for the state of California? California is the biggest manufacturing state in the country, not Michigan, where the auto industry created so many manufacturing jobs. California is our biggest manufacturing state. California is also our biggest agricultural state. Not Iowa, not Nebraska. California, biggest agricultural state in the country. California's economy is bigger than the economy of every foreign country in the world except China, Germany, and Japan. And so no state has bigger stakes in the burdens imposed by Donald Trump's illegal tariffs than California.
No state is poised to lose more than the state of California. So that's our state of mind. And that's why we're asserting ourselves on behalf of 40 million Americans. And I imagine if you caucus those 40 million Americans, you'd find few, I don't care where they were in the last election, that are celebrating this uncertainty, that are celebrating the largest tax increase in modern U.S. history. In essence, a sales tax.
That is the plaintiff, Gavin Newsom, in the lawsuit California filed against Donald Trump today, announcing that lawsuit. And here's the lawyer who filed that case, announcing the lawsuit this morning in the Central Valley of California with the governor, America's biggest agricultural basin, the Attorney General of the state of California, Rob Bonta.
Trump is attempting to override Congress and steamroll the separation of powers. That means he's trampling over his own party, by the way, which currently controls Congress. Again, Congress hasn't given him the authority to impose these sweeping and chaotic tariffs pursuant to emergency powers, which means he can't do it. Bottom line, Trump doesn't have the singular power to radically upend the country's economic landscape.
If you've been wondering all these years why the founders would have given the President of the United States the singular power to radically upend the country's economic landscape, the answer is they didn't. No one did. The Trump tariffs are unconstitutional, so says the Constitution, so says the richest and most economically powerful state in the Union.